Cali, I got the West, man. Deuce got the Chris. So, man, what they gonna do now? Put the West and the Chris together, man. Where you at? Where you at? Where you at? Atlanta, where you at? Where you at? Where you at? Birmingham, where you at? Where you at? Where you at? Oakville, where you at? Where you at? Where you at? Down south, showing no strain. Got the clubs and the club. We shaking that thing. Got the young player coming up on the run down. See the clubs and they too smart. Like real tight, body still right. From the weekend G to the end of the night. Got the screw coming out, got to get the club high. You know how to die. Everybody wanna be down with the side. 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 Everybody trying to get down with the side. Everybody wanna be down with the side. Welcome to the Free Lunch Podcast, home of the New South Movement. This is your boy Tight BG. Where you at?
Watch out now. Free Lunch Podcast. What's happening there? Your boy BG back on the MIC. Tight. It's that time again.
It is. Another time where we get to share our thoughts, share our opinions, provide facts, provide insight. And I really enjoy this, man. I enjoy being behind this microphone. I enjoy what we bring to the table, the thoughts, the perspectives, and I look forward to this every time we decide we gonna do another podcast.
We are the culture curators. Everything that we talk about here is about uplifting the community and pushing the culture forward in a positive direction. And so this is what we made this platform into, and we're going to keep rolling that way. So like we always say, y'all better catch on while this iron is hot, because we ain't going nowhere.
Okay, before we get into the conversation, you know, I like to kind of address some pretty hot topics that are happening. Have you seen or listened to either the Kevin Hart interview on Sway Universe, or have you listened to the Dame Dash interview on the Breakfast Club, Chatty Patty?
Chatty Patty, yeah. So, you know, I spend a lot of time, even when I probably should be doing work, checking out different interviews and listening to some of the commentary that some of our more famous members of the community have. So I've actually heard both of them, and both were very interesting, to say the least. Especially Dame Dash.
Also, you know what though? You know Dame Dash, his approach is sometimes questionable, and he to me, as I listen to him, he makes a lot of sense to me, but it's just his presentation, how he presents it. He seems like the Sly Fox kind of character, the guy that I'm trying to understand what it is he's trying to get out of you, because he's a hustler, and he's 100% hustler, and that's what he does. But what I do like, what he talks about and what he's saying is really empowerment, and it's really talking about self-empowerment. When he had the whole conversation about the boss versus partnering with someone, and essentially saying being your own boss, and if you work for someone else, you're essentially you have a boss, and he was basically saying he doesn't have a boss. And then they started questioning him about other relationships he's had with other recording companies, and he was basically saying he partnered with them, you know. And I don't know how that relationship was with these other recording agencies, but he makes sense when it comes to that self-empowerment kind of movement. You just have to try to filter between that sly hustle mentality that he brings to the table.
Well, yeah, his theme is solid. Like you say, with the self-empowerment, he's catching a lot of flack about it, though, because he is, I guess, taking away from those people that go in, that might just have a regular job, that are employees that go in, work, and earn money. And so those are the same people that he's going to turn around and ask to support whatever projects that he has with the money that they get from going to work those jobs. So, yeah, what he's saying is true. We do need to look at, you know, being entrepreneurs and having our own businesses and not being so quick to want to work for somebody. But at the same time, you have to watch the language, because, you know, there are a lot of people that do work, and you don't want to make them feel like you're so much better than them. And then the other part of that is that, like, you know, he talks about not having a boss and not ever having a boss and getting money and flipping it. But at some point, he had to work his way up to being where he is now. He had to do something. He probably had to work for somebody or do something, whether it be legitimately or illegitimately, to get the money to invest and to grow into a boss. And so I think what you know, the people that have kind of criticized him for that interview and his statements are just saying that, yeah, what you're saying is true, but there are avenues to getting to boss status. Like, you could work a 9-to-5 and use those resources that you get from that 9-to-5 to put into your you know, your investments and in your endeavors towards ownership. And then, you know, he talks so fast, sometimes he double talks and he talks in circles, which makes it even harder to side with him or agree with what he's saying. But there was some truth to it. I'll give him that. But we can't just make it concrete that I just came out a boss, I've been a boss, and if you're not a boss, then you don't matter. That's not a message that we want to convey to the people. Because you'll have people quitting jobs and doing all kind of stuff, and they won't even have no backup plan. And that's definitely not a solution to the problem.
Chatty Patty.
Chatty Patty.
Yeah, so I thought that was very interesting, entertaining. And then, of course, the Kevin Hart interview was informative. He's a smart business dude. I think he's how talented he is compared to some of the other comedians. You know, I found the battle between and the way he handled the conversation about Aries Spears and Mike Epps, and you know, we've done a show where we kind of talked about that whole conversation and that debate. But at the end of the day, he's a pretty intelligent businessman, regardless of your thoughts on his approach to stand-up comedy.
I think he also did a call-in interview to one of those media outlets, and he was talking about, you know, Breakfast Club, and he was just talking about not barking at the moon, which means that when you get to a certain place, you know, a lot of the noise that you may hear from some of your, you know, competitors or peers or whatever, you can't really focus or hear it because you got to maintain your place at the top, which is a sound statement. He is an excellent businessman. I think that's proven. The numbers don't lie on that. You know, but that still doesn't negate the fact of, you know, how business and integrity can miss each other. Like, you can be a great businessman, but you could be going against all of the unwritten rules or all of the honor code that is found within a said community or within a said profession. So we still haven't answered that question, but, you know, I guess that's just a conversation for the little people among us, because, you know, he's handling his business, and, you know, even with the integrity piece being in question, I wouldn't advise him to do anything other than what he's doing, because he's winning. I just hope that he can prolong his win. And then at the same time, you know, if there is a situation to where he can help somebody else get to those heights, that he's just as willing and just excited about doing that.
Right. I agree. I think you summarized that pretty good. So,
Yeah.
If you haven't seen the interviews, I encourage you to go look at a few interviews. So, 2 interviews with Damon Dash, one on the Sway Universe, the other on Breakfast Club, and then there's some interviews with Aries Spears and with Mike Epps on Sway Universe, and Kevin Hart kind of responds to that. So, very interesting stuff that's happening in entertainment. But with that said, kind of want to transition to today's topic and conversation, and essentially we haven't even had our discussion, or we haven't even shared our thoughts on some pretty hot topics, some pretty popular conversations that have occurred here within the last month. And I guess it's an opportunity for you and I, BG, to share our thoughts. but hopefully we can talk about this from a different perspective than what you normally hear when you hear the discussion surrounding the Sigma Alpha Epsilon chapter, and essentially them. For those of you that are not familiar, there were some students or some fraternity members that were a part of the Sigma Alpha Epsilon. I think pretty much everyone should be up to speed on this particular story, but they were on a chartered bus headed to some type of celebration, and you could hear fraternity members kind of chatting out something along the lines of there'll never be an N-word in their organization. So you have the Sigma Alpha Epsilon folks and their use of the N-word. You have back in another example that we kind of want to use, and actually recently during the Selma March on Selma event, the Ku Klux Klan, who surprisingly enough they still exist. Me being in living on the East Coast, you don't hear too much about the Ku Klux Klan. So with you living in the South and living in the city of Selma, you may be more abreast to what they're doing. But long story short, during the Sunday after the Bloody Sunday March, members of the Ku Klux Klan left flyers on residents in the city of Selma, left flyers for essentially asking recruiting new members to join their organization. I found it very interesting. The way that I heard about the story personally was on www.al.com. And I kind of, after reading that story and seeing that story put out, I actually kind of thought that it was actually used as another way to recruit more members throughout the state. And I found it interesting how the story was actually written, and then to see the flyers actually printed and shown in the newspaper. I actually thought that it wasn't really so much of a story that was written, but it was actually more of a more widespread recruiting tool for agitators that may have been upset at the Bloody Sunday festivities and the March on and Selma. The last thing I wanted to kind of point out, BG, before we transition into actual discussion about it, is that those same flyers were actually found in Auburn University. So a few days later, members of the Ku Klux Klan started placing those flyers at residents in Auburn University, where both you and I attended college. Now, I bring that all up to say you and I had some conversations, and you brought up a point in which you basically stated we need to figure out how not to let these type of incidents really take us off track, but allow them to emphasize why we have to stay focused and how these incidents are actually fuel for us going to the next level if we stay focused. Can you kind of elaborate on those thoughts and those conversations and let me know what you were thinking when you made those statements, and kind of use that as the way to kind of drive today's conversation?
You know, when you talked about those examples that you just given, it seems like all of those things come from a place of trying to remind, us as African Americans that those things, those elements of racism, those elements of white supremacy still exist, even though we feel like, people are using the statement, calling it post-racial. I guess since the, since Barack Obama took office as president, getting close to 8 years ago, for a lot of us, there was a lot of hope in that, and America had finally arrived and had started to see the values of equality and seeing that, we all have a contribution that we can make, and it's just a matter of us working together. But deep in the underlay, there was still this thought that this was a country for and built for, by, and for the betterment of basically the white demographic. And so what we're seeing is just these little hints, these little suggestions that even though you might think that things have changed, that we're still here and we're still active. And I think those things are designed to tap into that old historical attempt to bring such fear to the people that the people are no longer able to operate in what's good for them. That fear keeps people from empowering themselves or being willing to stand up and speak out and do whatever that they need to do to preserve their community. So, what I was saying to you is that, these are examples for us to know that we still have work to do and we have to stay focused, and we can't get caught up into trying to battle or getting so caught off guard by these things, because these are old tactics. We've seen this before and we know why they exist. We know why they're using them. And if we could just stay focused on what we need to do in terms of building ourselves up, building faith and trust between members of our community, and taking pride in, okay, well, we're going to do this for ourselves. We're going to make sure that we have educational institutions that support us. We're going to make sure that we have food sources that are going to be good for us and not, going to poison us. And so basically I was just tapping into that, because a lot of times, there's just this desire to, when something happens, when we feel wronged about something, we have this emotional response and we get caught up in the back and forth fighting with trying to convince the other side of how they're so wrong and how they shouldn't be doing certain things. We spend so much energy fighting with them that we don't have enough energy or focus to do the things that we need to do for ourselves. And so hopefully with this conversation, we can kind of bring some of those points out and start having this conversation and redirecting our people's focus on the things that really matter and not getting lost in that nonsense.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that point up, because that's actually something that I've been preaching for years. And I say that because we had a conversation on this podcast a while ago in which we talked about this idea of racism, and I was very vocal in stating that me personally believe that since racism is an ideology, that our focus shouldn't be so much so around trying to bridge the gap between this ideology known as racism, but more or less us as some would consider an oppressed group, looking internally and looking for ways to self-empower through education and economics. Mm-hmm. So that's always been my tactic, and that's always been my thoughts around how we should handle racist individuals. Now, the question I ask you before we proceed, because personally I think the conversation should be around moving forward and looking internally in the ways that we can progress as a people. But I guess the question I ask for you is, have you come on board with my thoughts?
I was always on board with your thoughts. But the thing that I would add to that, though, is that if I was not aware of the history, if I was not aware of the lay of the land, then I would be oblivious to some of the things that are in place that have to become a part of the conversation of your strategy as you try to empower yourself. Because the thing is this. So, for example, let's just say if I wanted to start my own business, unless I've got a fair amount of money in my pocket, then I'm going to probably have to go to get a loan from somebody. Now, I could be blind to the fact and figure that everybody that I go to is going to be willing to help me. And then if I don't get it, it's just a matter of my merit not meeting up to their standard. But I also know that there are a lot of institutions that don't want to do business with black people. So in knowing that, I know not to get so thrown off of my journey what I need to do, because I'm going to likely encounter somebody on the other side that don't want to see me prevail. I come into the game knowing that. So now I'm already prepared for the strategy. I'm already prepared for if I go to this bank and these dudes be like, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to comply or work with you, then I already got a plan B in mind, because I know what the system is like. I know what the system is going to present. So I have to embed that in my strategy as well. You can't go into the thing oblivious and not knowing that these things. That's like preparing for a battle and not knowing who your enemy is. You're going to get messed up. So you have to scout it out. You have to have an understanding of the plays that are in play, and then that helps strengthen your strategy as you work to empower yourself. That's what I've always said. I never discounted empowerment. Empowerment is the only way that we're going to get there, because we're the only ones that are really that really care about our well-being. No other party, no other group, no other side cares about us like we're going to care about ourselves. So empowerment is the key to it all.
And a lot of my thoughts and ideas, actually, again, if I was to recap, on that particular show, I believe I share with the audience how I attended a event at TSU, Texas Southern University, 3rd Ward, Houston, Texas, in which, what's the guy name on Hardball, I think, Chris Matthews, was doing a joint show with Tom Joyner, and it was centered around race in America. And it was at that point where I realized that the conversation around race is more or less for TV networks and for certain media personalities, it's a means to generate conversation to press hot buttons to profit off of. So it was at that point and during that conversation, which had to be back in the early 2008, 2009, 2007 time frame, that I realized that the fight or the focus has to shift from that of racism or that whole ideology to self-empowerment and education. So when we talk about empowerment and education, we really need to learn how to focus and block out the noise, like you just mentioned, with the tactics of the KKK flyers or the, I think every year there's a blackface incident at a university. And at this point, we shouldn't be as surprised or as emotionally upset, but we should more or less understand that this is kind of the law of the land, and really be focused on education and empowerment, economic empowerment, and figuring out ways within our community to decrease the degrees of separation between the Oprah Winfreys and the young girl that's going to be born today or tomorrow in the ghetto, and figuring out how we can connect them so that we can have more Oprah Winfreys or more Jay-Z's or whomever within our own community. And from a strategy perspective, that's the message that I believe should be pushed as part of this New South movement.
Yeah, and your sister gonna probably jump me for this because I always say it, but it's so many levels to it outside of just the
she did, so you say.
Yeah, outside of just the the messages that were found on people's doorsteps about the Ku Klux Klan and the video capturing of the fraternity on that bus, we also have to look at, well, who are the culprits? Because, say, for example, that fraternity, those kids are going to graduate and they could potentially be your city councilman, a legislator, a judge, or stuff like that. So for us, we see that. So if we speak back to empowerment, it's like, okay, we've got to make sure that that type of energy and that type of sentiment doesn't make it into our municipalities and the things that as citizens we rely on. So in the whole vetting process, or in the whole process of where you're checking out candidates or you're trying to find out what a person's background, that right there, that type of stuff is a clue as to what you're dealing with. Right. So if you see a candidate and you start, we always emphasize like researching these people and know where they come from. It's like you researching and you see that this dude was a part of SAE, then, we definitely got to fight against you because you might be bringing some of that stuff into our courtrooms and things like that. So that's really the part when this stuff hits instead of just getting that emotional about it and upset, is looking at the story deeply and seeing, how it's going to play out, looking down the road and basically arming yourselves against these type of things that will show up. But like I say, it's just a play on a tactic and tactics that have always been used against us. And it's even reasons for why they put so much energy into doing those certain things. It's just amazing. It's just amazing how all of this stuff has revved up after the election of Barack Obama and some of these things that have happened in his term that has really gotten people fired up, man. Like they're doing all kinds of crazy stuff.
I think it's okay to acknowledge the incidents like a KKK flyers, or to acknowledge the incident of the N-word, because that basically confirms that there's still a reason for us to press forward. But at the same time, that shouldn't be the focus. The focus should continuously be decreasing the degrees of separation between the have and the have-nots within our community. And until we're able to strategize and figure out ways for black empowerment and black entrepreneurship, then we're going to continue to live in a society where the haves continue to profit and the have-nots continue to kill themselves and get caught up in conversation that essentially are more or less emotional and not strategic.
But so the question is in knowing that we have to do that, knowing that we have to get to a place of community and working together to, in terms of economics and education, empowering ourselves, how do we do it?
And I still stick behind it. And it's that the current leadership in our community profits off of the racism conversation. They profit because they are put in positions where they're forced to speak on those topics, which puts money in their pockets and which provides them what they consider themselves to be their purpose. So there really has to be a new movement or a new discussion that is almost like the person when you're a kid, the child that keeps annoying you, and you at one point you just figure out how to ignore them. See, when they throw out these racism conversations and they throw out these racist acts, that are these blatant racist acts with the KK flies and all that kind of stuff, at some point you just got to ignore it and just say ignorant people going to be ignorant. and you got to understand that just some people gonna be that way, and you got to figure out how to stay the course. You know, and so what we have to do, see, when you got leadership that's in power, that are profiting off of those conversations, then they're going to continue to want to have those conversations. So whether it's a grassroots movement or whether it's a new set of leaders that come into place, one of those two means are going to have to be the way you kind of change the current tactics that are being used by both black leadership and white folks that profit off of it. Those are my thoughts, and I actually have a very interesting thought in conversation that, you know, I don't know if it's for this conversation, but it's a very thought provoking thought that I kind of came up with one day that maybe I share, but it's really around this idea of love, and it's really around this idea of we talk about when we talk about racism, we speak about love. We talk about, you know, you have to love how to love one another, and you know, the common theme and the common repeated quote is, in order to push out hate, you have to push it out with love. And that actually had me, we did a conversation once where we talked about how to love, and that conversation really was around relationships. But I actually think, and that's the reason why I think the Lil Wayne song is so deep, is because we're creating a group of human beings that I don't even think know how to love. So if the answer to racism and hate is to love your neighbor, but you don't know how to love, then how do you push out hate? Because I believe that we are building a generation of young people that don't know how to love. And I'm talking about figuratively.
Who are you talking about doing the loving? Are you talking about within our community loving one another? Or are you talking about loving all people of all races and ethnic backgrounds?
The latter. I'm talking about for the United States to be a country built on Christianity. And I'll share my thoughts that I had one day. You know, I find it very interesting that it's still one of the most racist when it comes to color and it comes to classism in the world. You know, when something happens that affects the United States, we tend to have the ability to come together as a people. But when we are dealing with just everyday blatant racism, we tend to separate and go our separate ways. You know, they say that they say Sunday is the most segregated day in the country, you know. And I find it interesting for us to be a Christian community, but yet, you know, the most popular Bible verse, and whenever we talk about Christianity, we say, for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son. And then the other verse, love, right? You know, he gave his only begotten son. But then the other verse say, love thy neighbor as you love thy neighbor as you love the Lord, or something along those lines. Oh no, he asked the question, how can you love God whom you've never seen but hate your neighbor? See, that's a very interesting quote, BG. And the reason why that's a very interesting quote is because your neighbor is the person you see every day. Now, if you say you this Christian person, and you love God, but you can't love your neighbor, then I kind of question your belief. Because you can't. And so the question that I pose to you is that did God, the Creator, create race classism, racism, gender, all as an ultimate test to see if you are really a true believer or non-believer. Because I tend to believe that this whole thing that we call humanity, for those of us that believe in Christianity, this whole thing that we call humanity is a test from the higher being trying to see how much we truly love God.
Nah, that's the devil, man. That's the thing, mark of the devil when you hate somebody, and it's a part of the world, and it's you as a Christian you got to overcome that and do whatever you need to do. But that's work of the devil when there's hatred involved. And this is where it gets.
But that's my whole point.
This is where it gets stick, because if we just kind of start and work backwards, Christianity as we know it was used to justify hatred. It was used to justify slavery because man got in and started interpreting and doing all the kind of things to fit his thing. If you want to go back deeper, you know, the Africa is the origin of all civilization. So everything started there. And what you've got is, if you just look at this on the street level, what you've got is a group of people that go in, they I don't want to use that word. They take advantage of resources. They take advantage of people, Europeans coming into Africa, taking advantage of the people, taking advantage of the resources, basically stealing it, stealing civilization, stealing culture, doing all of these things. So now, if I steal something from you, I take something from you, I make it mine. My fear is that one day that you're going to rise up against me and take everything you back, but take everything back because you know that I've wronged you. And so all of this hatred that you talk about is born from the fear and the guilt of Europeans coming in and doing wrong by Africans. And so to support that hate, they also have to convince themselves that they are supreme, that they are better than everyone else, that the Bible was written to support all of their acts, everything that they do. They manipulate that. Here comes white supremacy. White supremacy and racism work together because the number one thing that people want to do is they want to protect their civilization. They want to protect themselves from being wiped out, right? So they got to keep their foot on your neck. They got to keep you in fear to keep you from rising up and wiping them out. So everything that we see now, all of this stuff, the Ku Klux Klan, the Tea Party, all of these things that at the forefront of their messaging is that black folks don't matter. All of this thinking that makes a policeman quick to pull a trigger on a black kid, but makes him a little more, use a little bit more discretion when dealing with a white kid in a similar situation. It all stems back from that thought of white supremacy, fear, and I can't let these black people piece together. The problem that we will run into in our community, or have been run into in our community, yeah, it would be great for us to come together and stay focused and empower ourselves. But what happens when members of your community buy into white supremacy, buy into the fact that they are second-class citizens and the white man's water is always better? How do you bring your community together when people in your community, right side by side with you, don't believe in the same thing that you believe in?
Well, that's the reason. But that's education, and that goes back to my whole point when it comes to strategizing and essentially moving off of strategy and not emotion. Education and empowerment, right? So, I mean, economic empowerment. So you have to educate the people, and you have to educate them both on history, self-worth, and just regular educational curriculums. You have to, and and that's the first approach. My thoughts is that the interest of our current leadership isn't interested in that topic or that conversation because it takes away from them profiting. So we have to come up with a strategy that, number one, speaks on education and speaks on economic empowerment, but it needs to be done by either at the grassroots level by people like you and I that are interested in that type of movement, or we have to find new leadership that has the power and the influence to change and switch the conversation from the conversation of racism, because we all have to acknowledge and first understand that racism is alive. It's an ideology that currently exists, but we can't get so caught up emotionally in the N word that we hear at SAE or the Ku Klux Klan flyers that are being put out, because what happens is I believe today's leaderships will spend time trying to fight that fight, which it never gets to the root of what really needs to occur, and that's educating and economic empowerment to young African American folks.
But my question is what are we educating them on, and how do we educate them?
Well, I just said we educating them first on their history, what? Your history. You got to know and understand your history. You have to educate them on self-worth. You have to educate them mentally. See, we got a group of people right now that's the whole point that I just said when I was saying how to love. You got a group of people that don't even know emotionally how to love someone. You know, because they come from families and from broken families and from broken areas where they've never even learned how to love someone, literally. You have to go back and reteach these people that.
How you gonna do that?
How you gonna do it?
Yeah, how you gonna do that?
Well, first in the schools. You have to go back to the schools and you got to teach the people on black history. And when you learn your black history, you gain some self-worth. The first place is in the school. In the school, okay. Well, then you say, okay, what school you gonna teach it in? Because you got people, I just read something about the white parents getting upset because of the black history lessons. Well, the schools are segregated anyway. Nowadays, you're starting to see more segregation occur in this later age than you did when there was these whole Brown versus the Board of Education. I agree with that. So you saw the story on Tuscaloosa. So when you have the majority schools like that, the first thing is economic empowerment as well. You have to go in and set policies to redistribute the funds to go to these black universities and these black schools. So you have to. That's the reason why those two work together: economic empowerment and education. But it starts in the schools. It starts in the families. It starts at the churches. When you have pastors asking for $65 million for a jet, that right there tell you where that church is as far as if the leadership and the mentality. So why are we looking at this individual to be the leader? He's more interested in the $65 million jet, and he might have a program or two that speaks to what we talking about. But then you have to ask the question: how authentic is that organization? Is that just something put in place to be in place, or is that something that's really out there trying to educate the people and try to really self-empower them? A lot of the programs that are in place now aren't authentic, genuine programs. They're programs that have been put in place just out of doing something. And the more I think about it, I pose the question: do you start it at the top and then you work it down? Or you start it in the grassroots, and it's holding these schools, it's holding these principals, it's holding these church people accountable. It's demanding better television and and it's holding these folks accountable to say, hey, you know, black. We got to educate the people, and it's people like Oprah Winfrey and these so-called high-powered dollars spending money in our community to see our people progress.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think more.
You agree with what I just said, though?
Well, I mean, to a certain degree, but then at the same time, it's like you know, you're talking to those big people. You're talking to Oprah, and it's almost like trying to convince a racist not to be racist no more. They're going to do what they're going to do.
Exactly. That's why I said
they built their empires off of that. So for me, I think it's going to start on an individual basis.
But that's why I said it had to be grassroots. But go ahead.
It's got to be grassroots.
On an individual, like each individual has to make a decision that, you know, that their life is going to determine how long the community is preserved. And that goes all the way down to, you know, how you make your living, how you set up your family, who you date, who you get married to, how many children you have. All of those things matter because it starts on that individual level, creating this framework that you can build upon.
But see, that individual, you can't hold an individual responsible because that individual, that's like asking a drug head to stop doing drugs. See, a lot of people. I didn't say drug dealer. I said drug addict. When you said it, you said that it is on the individual responsible. And the point that I'm making is that some folks just don't have the education, and some folks just don't have the know-how as to that they're in a situation where they're not, that they just don't know. So it's gonna take, at the grassroots level, young folk and people that know to hold these principles and these mayors and these folks, and it's gonna have to hold them accountable.
I disagree because you can't discount the individual, even though that individual might be.
I didn't say discount them. I didn't say discount them. You have to help them get to a point to where they can be self-sufficient.
But at the same time, they, as an individual, they still have to be willing and be at a place to where they can be helped. They might be the addict, and it's their individual responsibility to seek it or to be in position to receive the help. But it's my position as a non-addict, as a person who's a rehab specialist, it's my responsibility as an individual to make myself available to help that person. It's community working together, but it starts at the individual level in terms of making a decision in terms of what you could do, because I could have all the resources in the world, but if that addict don't make a decision to come to the place where the help is, he gonna forever be an addict.
He's not gonna go to the place. You gonna have to take that addict to that place, and then it's gonna be on him, and that's my whole point. That's my whole point. That's my whole point, though. But in order for somebody to take him, you have to take him, and what I'm suggesting is that we at the grassroots level have to take the addict to the place. Now, if he's not willing to intake it, then that's a different story. I can lead the horse to the water, but I can't make him drink.
That's what I'm saying. But it's still, in order for it all to work, is everybody on an individual basis has to be committed to doing better for the community with whatever capacity that you have. It comes down to individuals making the decision. He got to be willing to come. He could come and then he make an individual decision that he don't want to come back no more. He would much rather be an addict, right? But it still comes down to that individual. Whatever capacity you're in, whether you be the addict or you be the specialist, the individuals have to be committed to betterment. That's the only way that it's going to work. Because if it's not, you're going to have 50-50. You're going to have the people that have committed to doing it and made a decision. And then you've got the other 50 that need it, but they decide that they're not going to buy into the program, which is basically what we're faced with right now. We're faced with a lot of people that have decided that they don't care about the community. And then you got another handful that do care about the community. It don't work until everybody make a decision that they care about the community and they're willing to do whatever they need to do to make it better. and we can get on one accord with what we're committing to, then we have to develop this faith and this trust in one another. Because you can say economic empower, support black businesses, but if you got a majority of black people that don't trust the black business owner, then he gonna take his money where he been taking it the years before. So it's so many degrees to that. And for me, we are working within a system that has taught us to degrade ourselves and not respect ourselves. So
I agree with all of that.
It's going to be more than just economics and education. It's going to be a whole lot of things that we're going to have to rework in our minds and our conscience to even get us moving in the right track.
But still, at the core of that is education. To me.
But what are you educating?
Mental health. You got to educate. Folks got to understand where they are. You got to first understand that you need help. You got to understand the symptoms that you've been dealt, and then you have to figure out ways to address that. So when I talk about education, I'm talking about education both in the school as well as mentally and physically.
I'm talking about, it's easy to say educate them, but how are you going? What are you educating them with? How are you educating them on?
And I just
how
said
are you reaching them?
And
how are you reaching them?
And I just said it. And I just said that. And education.
In the school system?
Yes.
Well, why are we
when
not
you get
doing
an
that
education,
already?
when you get an education, you and I were fortunate enough to be able to get education, and we didn't fall into those statistics where we fell outside of those statistics. And because of that,
we were fortunate enough to have support systems.
We were fortunate enough to have support systems that put us in great educational situations.
I ain't gonna say that.
We were.
My educational situation wasn't great. My educational situation didn't compare to somebody that was going to.
You got a degree. You got a degree from Auburn University. So what are you talking about?
But that's later on. What about high school? What about these kids that ain't even making that elementary school is sub level? What about those people that don't even have a legitimate preschool program?
I didn't have an education at Harvard. At Hoover. But I had just enough education. That's
what I'm saying.
That's just enough education. But I had enough education. Was my caliber education up to the level of a Hoover? No. And that's not even what I'm suggesting. But I had enough level of education such that I'm able to understand that there's more and there's better.
So school alone did that?
I didn't say school alone either.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, if we had to just
you have to strategize. You have to strategize, though.
If you had to just rely on, just take your parents and everybody out. If you just had to rely on what you got from school, you think you would have made it to where you are now? If everything that you got came from your school,
I understand this more. But in order to start a movement, you have to outline some high priority issues to first address. You can't go in there and just start trying to address multiple things. And maybe we add, to your point, the family structure. But again, I point that. But again, I point that to education, because I still feel like that because we don't understand the importance of it. So if you feel like the family structure is a separate entity, which it is, but at the same time, to me, that falls under education, understanding, and knowing the significance of the two-parent household. That's my point. So when I speak of education, I may be generalizing for multiple subparts that fall underneath that umbrella, but the point is that, to me, education and economic empowerment are the two priorities that need to be addressed in our community in order for us to move forward. Now, you may say education, economic empowerment, family, and entrepreneurship, and I would say to that, family falls under education until we are fully competent enough to understand that family structure is a separate entity.
Okay, so you saying education as in formal education going to school?
In terms of formal education going to school, in terms of mental health, in terms of generalizing it to mean understanding the importance of a two-parent household, just having knowledge.
And I'm trying to figure out what entity going to give you all those things.
It's not. It's going to be a combination. That's why I said that it starts at the church. You're gonna learn the importance of family at the church and mental health at the church. But the churches aren't doing that. They're not doing that. So that's why I'm saying that when I speak of education, I'm thinking of three entities: the church, I'm thinking of the school system, mental health hospital, all that stuff. Because we're a group of people that are lost even from the mental perspective because of what you said earlier.
We got to wait on them things to transform before we can start empowering ourselves.
No, I'm saying if you want to have a focus, you have to have a game plan. You don't just go out there and say you're going to run a defense. You say you're going to run a 3-4 or 4-3. Then once you establish that defense you're going to run, which is, in this case, we're going to run economic empowerment defense, and we're going to run the education defense. And once we get those established, then we could build upon that. You have to have a foundation first, and I'm saying that education and economic empowerment is the foundation.
We need to start our own schools.
I said earlier we have to take the schools that we currently have, and we have to hold the leadership accountable for educating the people. When you got Central Tuscaloosa, and then we have to work with the policies to get the money funded over there distributed equally. That's what I'm suggesting. What are you suggesting?
I mean, I think it will come down to that, because what you're doing is
you're asking me to put together a plan on the spot. Do I have a plan on the spot? No. But I can tell you the two things that are of importance, in my opinion, are education and economic empowerment. Now, if I can categorize those, and if you want me to put together a plan for the next show, I will spend some days putting together a plan, a strategy that we can exercise to execute this, because those are my strengths.
I think that'll be good. Because for me, I think that it's actually in a different order. I totally believe that the family is first, because when you look at a lot of these kids are dealing with mental health issues, and a lot of these mental health issues are based off of the family structure being unstable and parents not being there, and so the kids don't have a balance. They don't have the guardianship and the guidance, and by having that issue, it prevents them from learning. You know, a lot of these kids are walking around with anger issues and things like that because of how they're being treated or the love that they're lacking. They ain't focusing on no school. They not thinking about school.
How are you gonna revamp the family structure?
As much as you gonna revamp the church structure and all those type of things.
You have to educate the people. You have to first educate the people of the importance of a two-family household.
We can educate the people, but I think that education is going to come outside of those institutions. It's going to take forever to turn those institutions around, because they spent so many years investing in the way that the business that they do now.
You're missing the point. You're missing the point of what I'm saying. What I'm suggesting is, if I come from a single parent household, how are you going to convince me that, and I come out okay, how are you going to convince me that a two-parent household is better? I don't have no example to show me that a two-parent household is better than a single-parent household.
There are many.
So you have to educate that young person or whoever thinks like that to say this is why a two-parent household is going to be more beneficial. You can't assume that they understand. That's why education.
In the public school system.
But I never said that we're going to limit education to the public school system either.
Well, you didn't tell me where you were going to give. You said you
Yes, I did. I said the church. I said the public school system, mental hospital. I said all three of those are part of the education, need to be part of the entire education. So you tell me where you're going to get it then. If you're not going to get it at the church.
It's going to come down to people in the community that have mental health specialties, that have degrees in child psychology, establishing programs in their community that are geared towards these issues that we are very familiar with. It's going to take me in the healthcare field establishing programs that are specific to the needs of the people, because you're talking about entities You just get the people in. All I have to do.
You gonna educate them. You gonna educate them, man.
On an individual basis. I'm not relying on the hospital because the hospital is not gonna give me the funding to do that. If the hospital funds me to approach the ills that are making them profitable, they're gonna put themselves out of business. So they're not gonna do that.
Well, maybe your approach is better than my approach, but you saying the same thing I'm saying to the point the way it's education. And you trying to pencil box me in and say all I said was the educational system, and I said no. I've said multiple times on this podcast that it's going to be more than just the school system. But you continue to try to box me in, I said the church, and I said the mental hospital, and maybe you are, and maybe and maybe we establish our own that does that is what I'm suggesting.
That's exactly every time.
That's what I'm suggesting.
You came back around to the church and mental hospitals, and what I'm saying is that the institutions that you're pointing at have been in place. We got to wait on them to reform. They're not going to reform. So it's coming back. It's coming back to individuals that care about this stuff, putting themselves in the position to help the people that need it.
Because those things are
I said something similar when I said that you're gonna have to hold these people accountable that are in these positions. But if your word reform and people that care is a better, it sounds better, then we can go with that. But at the end of the day, I'm still gonna stand on my belief that education and economic empowerment are the two foundations that need to be put in place. Now, in regards to the family structure, I am penciling that and putting that underneath the educational system because you have to educate the people on the importance of a family structure. Once they've been educated, then it could be a standalone entity in which we all can agree that the family structure is the most important thing besides God in our life. God, family, school, Omega.
I say family first. I say family first.
All right.
And all those other things come after that.
So you say family before God?
No, man.
Well, family
is an extension of God.
Okay.
No.
All right. This was a very entertaining and interesting debate. I'll be very interested in hearing what the folks have to say. But I think to summarize for me, at the end of the day, we got to figure out how not to allow the KKK, the SAE incident, these blackface incidents that occurred during Halloween to tour us and our focus from the ultimate prize. And that really, in a nutshell, is trying to decrease the degrees of separation between the have and the have-nots within our community. For me, that means figuring out how to revamp, reform the educational and both economic empowerment within our community. So that's my 2 cents as to what I believe.
Yeah, and it comes down to just action, man. It's a lot of talking going on. A lot of people have different theories, but we just got to get active and start doing what we can, whatever your contribution is. Whether you be in a position, you be an educator, direct educator, take advantage of that opportunity to educate the students on what they're going to need survival wise, not just in the reading and writing, but also just in living and survival and being able to interrelate to different people. And then if you're in leadership positions, especially if you're a representative of the community, put the community first. But yeah, it's a point of action and putting your talents on display in whatever capacity that you have to help your neighbor in whatever form or fashion that you can. And I think that for me, that is the way that we kind of get to this point of empowering ourselves, because for me, I feel like we first got to trust one another. We are conditioned because of the system that we live in is a cutthroat system. Everybody is out there trying to get theirs, and they will take advantage of you to get it. So we're very protective and we're not trusting. So in order for us, and I've said it in a previous podcast, to really make it, we've got to reform from that way of thinking and get more to this communal thought that, you know, we are our brother's keeper and being able to help people when we can. That's all I got.
All right, so since BG put me on the spot on this particular podcast, you know, I think we both need to come up with what our strategy would be in order to push what we've considered the movement to be forward. So I'll be interested in having a follow-up podcast where we both share what our strategy would be.
Mm-hmm.
What you say?
All good.
Or what say
I walk around with that. That's good. Ain't got no problem with that.
You walk around with your strategy as to how
I
you
walk around with that.
Oh, so you ready to display it today?
I mean, I will. I don't have no problem. I'm serious, man. I walk around with that. Like,
I don't have the ultimate strategy. I didn't know what to focus on. So I definitely think about how we would implement what I believe to be economic and educational empowerment. I would definitely. How can the people? You frustrated at me, Doc?
What? For what? Man, no. I do this, man. This is what I do. All day, every day.
Coming from the 2-7, this is what y'all do.
All day, every day.
Man, how can the people reach us, man? I got to get up out of here.
All right, yes, sir. FreelunchPodcast.com for podcasts and blogs. Also, we on Instagram, Free Lunch Podcast, and on Twitter, Free Lunch Pod. Check us out sometime.
Man, y'all check us out. I'll be interested to see what the people say about this. So I'm pretty sure my brother and whomever be hitting me up about this podcast after they listen to it. So interested in hearing what y'all got to say. Free Lunch Podcast, home of the New South Movement, and we out of here. Peace.
Yes, sir.